This is an interview with Charles Cairns of Dalton, Wisconsin, and Mamie Tillema-Marty of Madison, Wisconsin, on May the 9th, 1989 at the Fountain Lake Farm by Erik Brynildson. Okay, we're going to start with Mamie talking about her relationship with the Cairns and the Muirs and that link.
Well, the Cairns came over in 1849, settled in Buffalo Township, Marquette County, as well as the Muirs. As far as we know, they didn't know each other till they got here, but we aren't sure of that either. And but I think they probably had the same land agent who brought them out here from Kingston. And the Cairns farm was in the same hands for how many years? Well, you'll hear about that maybe a little later. And the young folks knew each other. They were about the same age. The Cairns family, the oldest was John Cairns, and then in the Muir family, Margaret Muir and Sarah Muir and John Muir were just a little younger. I think John Muir was possibly 3 years younger than John Cairns.
Okay.
And I think the school was the center of a lot of social activities.
Now, when we talk about the school, are we talking about the school that was near the Fountain Lake over here, or the one over near Hickory Hill?
The one over there.
The one over at Hickory Hill. Okay.
At least the one where they tricked them with the, it's told in the Marsh book, with the putting the stuff in the chimney and smoking the people out of the crowded schoolhouse on the night of the spelling bee.
And that was the spelling bee where I think Katie spelled John down the first time, and he said, well, that'll never happen again, or something like that.
I would like to have heard their Scottish brogues at that time.
Okay. Did either one of you ever recall hearing about David Taylor or David Gray in the area?
A Gray, I believe, was a settler right on the Marquette-Columbia County line, where what we used to know as the Bill Brown farm.
Okay.
And I believe that they came and our family stayed with the Grays after they left the Kingston area.
Okay. Would this be Alexander Gray, Charlie?
Possibly.
Okay. Somewhere I think I've read where that farm, or maybe was at one time, belonged to a Dr. Strong. Does that ring a bell?
Never heard that
Never
name.
heard that one. Okay. How would we find the Alexander, the old Gray farm? It's right on the line. How would one go to get over there?
From what if it's where I think it is, it's the first house farm west of 22 on CM.
Okay.
22 goes, CM is the county line between Columbia and Marquette County.
Yes.
Go down 22 to CM, turn right. There's the old brick schoolhouse sits in the corner there, and it's a quarter of a mile west.
Okay, what side of the road would that be on?
It'd be on the right-hand side, the
right
north side.
The north side, okay. Okay.
It is in Marquette County. That, I'm quite sure, was the Gray.
Okay. Did either one of you ever know the Duncan family, or Jessie Duncan?
Yeah.
Do you know her, Charles?
Oh, yes.
I'd like to hear about her.
Well, I don't know just too much about it because she was getting quite old. But, her parents, or at least the Willie Duncans, came over on the same ship that our great-grandparents did, and they said Willie was sick every inch of the way, seasick. And Jessie was never married, and she would, whether she was an invalid or not, or she didn't get around much. But anyway, my maiden aunts from Portage, they would, one of them would come out and visit Jessie, because my dad would drive her around, and then I helped thrash there a couple of times when Frank Waite worked there for all his life, and then he married Jessie's adopted daughter, Ann, who I think to this day is still alive. But Jessie was in her 90s then and bright, real bright, and maybe just a little crusty, but crabby, but whatever.
Where would the Duncan farm be then? How would we find our way over there?
Oh, that's right on, let's see, Grouse.
Down the road from Hickory Hill?
Yeah, just west of there.
Which one would it be if we went west of Hickory Hill? Or
West of Hickory Hill, you come out of Hickory Hill's driveway, and just...
We're now looking at a plat map to see just who owns that property now, maybe.
Here's Hickory Hill, and there's the driveway out. Right there.
On which side of the road?
On the south side.
On the south side. Who does it look like owns that then now? Is that there's an HS with 10 acres? I think that's Harvey Schmidt or something.
Oh, well, then it could be possibly this other.
Is Willard Davis.
There's 80 acres between Duncan's land and this road.
I see.
So that would be, this belongs to this person. So this would be the Duncan land right here.
Where was the farm or the house located then on the land? Do you think it's where that square is, or is it more over where the...
I would believe it right in this corner.
Right in that corner.
There's a nice barn there and a nice house.
Okay. And
It was
an old house? It was an old frame house?
A frame house, but it was new for that neighborhood 50 years ago.
Oh, okay. So was it a smaller one, or was it a big two-story?
A bungalow type.
A bungalow type?
I believe.
Okay, okay.
It's a nice, was a nice, well-kept
Okay.
barn, everything.
Did you ever hear stories of your relatives, your ancestors visiting Mrs. Muir and the daughters after they moved from the farm at Hickory Hill and moved into Portage? Did they ever go into town to see him? Or did you ever hear stories about your ancestors doing business with David Muir, and he was in business with Perry, in Portage?
Not really.
Not
I
too
never.
much of that,
No,
huh?
I never heard.
Okay.
The only thing I ever really heard was, and I believe it's in one of these writings here, was my Uncle Chan went to Portage with his dad, and John Muir was in Portage to visit his brother, and he came out and stayed overnight at our grandfather's farm.
Oh, okay.
And
And where would that farm be now?
well, it would be where it says Allen Bennett.
Allen Bennett there, which is just
Just
west of 22.
22, yeah.
And it's off of Grouse Road.
Yeah. And the buildings were down in here, way at the south end.
But they came from that road down.
Yeah.
I see. The buildings are gone now?
All but the barn.
Oh,
the barn is still there. Yeah. You can't see it from the road because there's a hill in the way.
It looks like that farm, Charlie, must be pretty close to the original Gray farm.
That would be, the original Gray farm would be
Across the
here,
roads?
right here.
Oh, not Teddy O'Neill.
Yeah. Yeah.
Teddy O'Neill would be the Gray farm. Okay.
To my,
I see.
as near as I can tell.
Mm-hmm. All right.
But anyway, they, Uncle Chan said that John Muir and his dad stayed up all night talking. He got up in the morning and they were still talking.
And we figured out he must have been about 5 years old then?
We figured probably 5, because it tells here someplace that John Muir came back to visit Portage 1885, and Uncle Chan was born in 1880.
Uh-huh.
And again in 1892 or 94,
Both, yeah.
whichever, but we figured too that Uncle Chan would have been 12 and 14, he would have had to stay home and worked rather than tag along to town.
Sure.
The
Okay.
way it was. And
What did the Scotch immigrants, the hardworking, frugal Scotch people that settled in the Buffalo Township, what did they think of John Muir? I mean, what were the things you used to hear about him? Did you ever hear that he was kind of an oddball or anything?
they didn't, I never heard him say much.
Never heard
In
him say
fact,
too much.
no.
Well, my mother, I suppose it was the two grandmothers, that they felt very sorry for the grandmother, Muir, because he didn't keep in touch with them.
We were out of the kind of the Scottish neighborhood over in there. They were more in this part of Buffalo.
And you were mostly Irish over there then?
Well, just plain down east Yankees and whatnot all.
All right.
So we didn't, although my uncle did talk about it quite a bit, but none of us listened. and none of the neighbors paid any attention because it was, well, it would
Too busy working hard. And
too
trying to
busy trying to keep body and soul together.
Yes, indeed. Okay.
And the farm from the sheriff.
Well, Charlie, that brings up, before we had the tape player on, a letter or some letters that you inherited as a young man.
Oh, yes.
I'd like to hear that story again.
Uncle Chan inherited the furniture and lots of other things from his Aunt Mary,
Sister to Catherine.
sister to the Catherine that married the Muir.
Okay.
And in some of the bureaus were a whole bunch of letters, and one letter was to this Aunt Mary from some of the Muir family from probably Twin Cities area. And one part of it was, and we heard from somebody in California, and says, John is gone again. They don't know where he is, haven't heard from him for 2 years. And his family, well, and I guess the mother was taking good care of the family, but they, the tone of the letter just didn't talk as though they thought too much of it.
They're kind of frustrated by him being gone so long.
Apparently.
Yeah, yeah. And then you told about another story about the cedar limb on Observatory Hill that had Muir's initials carved in it.
Yeah, that was Uncle George Tillema and my father William. They were up there on the Observatory Hill and saw apparently my dad had been up there before, and so anyway, Uncle George writes, and William Cairns showed this limb to me, and on it was the name J. Muir, 1856. And Uncle George was telling me about this way back, and says we should have cut the limb off, but we didn't want to do it, destroy any property, and they went back several years later, and the limb was gone. But it says in this writing here he was going to take it to the State Historical Society in Madison.
Right.
But in those days, hard to tell whether the limb would ever get there because transportation was was something scarce then.
What do you suppose happened to the limb?
Probably somebody took it home and for a memento. But
Maybe ended up in a fireplace.
Yeah, who's to say?
Yeah.
Who's to say? What about the area you can see from Observatory Hill, the Madden Lakes? What about the Madden Lakes? I don't know too much about the history of those.
Oh, that is, you can see for a long ways. I haven't been there since 1932. That would be almost 60 years, but you can see a long ways to the south. You can see Partyville. And the lakes do show up. And Madden's Lake, that is a natural, deep spring-fed lake. And then there's a few other lakes that are just flat ponds. But Madden's Lake is, or it used to be called Thompson's Lake, but whatever.
It used to be called Thompson's Lake.
Yeah, that's the deep one right there, and these are the kind of the flat mud lakes they call them. But that is the main lake. Okay. There, that is the main lake.
What did you ever hear of a fern lake in the area?
Never.
Never did. How about after the Galloways left the Fountain Lake farm, they moved to another farm somewhere, I think, toward Portage, and they called it Mound Hill. Do you know where that might be?
No, I have no idea at all.
Okay. Now, what relatives from the Cairns side are buried in the little UP cemetery?
Up here in Buffalo.
Right.
My great-grandfather John and his wife Violet, and their daughter Margaret, that was never married. And then my aunt Rose Agnes, that married Lawrence Hand, she is buried there also.
Okay.
And those are the only ones that I know of.
Would Lawrence Hand, how would he be related to Willis Hand that married Mary?
That I don't know.
Okay.
This first I'd heard of it was today when she...
All right. Did you, Charlie, did you ever know a man by the name of Sylvester Adrian that had Indian Echoes? And I know he worked hard for the creation of the park over here.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about what you remember about him?
Well, he was not just too much. He was a intelligent man and a jolly man, and seemed to know what he was doing. But that's about all. We didn't socialize too much in that neighborhood.
Okay. Do you recall William Duncan, or was he dead by the time?
He was long gone.
He was long gone.
I'm quite sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Jessie was the only one that I ever saw.
And Jessie probably then had this little bungalow house built after her parents died.
No doubt.
And then she lived there alone with Annie Duncan.
Yeah.
Is that? And also Frank Waite.
Frank Waite was their hired man
he was
for
the hired man.
40, 50 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
He ended up marrying Annie Duncan. Annie Duncan. Okay.
Because Annie received the farm, and then they sold it and moved to Partyville, and then I believe she is in the nursing home.
But that's where they moved to, is right in Partyville.
Yeah.
Then. I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
If she would be somebody to, if she's still living, to look up, because she always was bright and smart, and maybe still is. She's not all that ancient either. Probably, possibly late 80s, if she's still living.
Are there any descendants of the original Grays, the Alexander Gray, the farm that you pointed out, in the area still?
Not that I know of.
Not that you know of.
No.
Does anybody else come to mind that I should talk with, old people that may help us recall some things?
Would any of the Cuffs have information? On the older ones? Of course, we're older, and I wouldn't use
There aren't, unless it would be of the Harry Cuff family in Portage. They had, of course, Audley Cuff was, you've heard of him across the road here.
Yes, I have. I know he donated some land for the park.
But what family he came from, I don't know.
You may be able to trace him on that genealogy and find out which were.
But of the Harry Cuff family, Harry was the first cousin to her mother and my father. His mother was a Cairns.
Okay.
And she was born in Scotland too, wasn't she?
Yeah, and he is long dead, and his family is pretty much gone. But I think he has his grandchildren would be my age and older, but they might be around Portage.
What kind of name is Tillema? What is that nationality?
Holland, Fries.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there a county of Fries over there? Or?
Whole section, northern
section.
Friesland, yeah.
And there's Friesland, I've seen that off of Highway 33.
Yeah, that's where he was raised, was around Friesland.
I see. All right.
And see, my mother went there to teach school, and that's where she met him.
We need to pick up Mamie now a little bit too about. Mamie, you can tell us now. As we started this thing originally, I wanted you to explain how you're related to the, with all this, the connections to the Muirs. We never had a chance to do that yet. So now your father was George Tillema.
Yes, and my mother, Lucy Cairns, was a teacher, and her sister and her brother were rural teachers, and as were the aunts, they who came from Scotland were also teachers, and the Muir girls, I think a couple of them were teachers in the area. And I think they probably used their Scottish education to advantage. But and schools were in short terms, such I think 2 or 3 months at a time. And so some of them could go to school in the winter who had to work at home the rest of the year. And my mother taught here in the Ennis School somewhere around the 1900s.
No, it was called the Ennis School.
That's as I remembered. I don't know.
I heard the River School when we were in school, but those school names changed.
Okay. Now, the school that Charlie's talking about, I've always known as the one over here by the lake was the Riverside School, but you think maybe before that it was called the Ennis School?
I don't know for sure.
Okay.
I asked my sister, I called her Sunday and asked her, but she knew I'd asked her before, and so we were trying to sharpen it up a little.
That could have been, though.
And as far as she knew, it was, she taught it, lived at the Ennis's and taught in that school, so.
Oh, okay. What year would that have been, do you think?
I think it would have been somewhere around 1900, because she went to Friesland to teach somewhere around 1903 or 04 from here, I think. Wait, she taught at Green Lake in between there, that's right. So this may have been her first school here.
Well, either that or the one over by Vandersumps.
Oh,
She taught there when she was 14, 15 years old.
oh.
Is that school still standing, Charlie, the one you're talking about? Okay.
But she told how their food was mostly boiled food.
I'd like to hear
boiled
about
meat
that.
and boiled vegetables and all. And when we were fixing Thanksgiving dinner and talking about stuffing a turkey and all, and she said they never had that when they were young. I'd like to ask some of the older folks what kind of food they had, and you often find out that's about what it was.
So they boiled everything then, and
yeah.
back then.
And there may have been other reasons. Their ovens weren't dependable and things like that.
Refrigeration. even
No
and all that.
refrigeration.
But
And
she lived here at the Fountain Lake Farm in the old
as
Ennis
far as
house?
I know. Mhm.
Okay. Did she ever
And,
describe the house, what it was like, or what the site was like?
Wish I'd asked more questions, but she often talked about Mrs. Ennis and what she learned from Mrs. Ennis, such as cooking and how to stuff an animal, a turkey, a fowl.
Okay. And so your sister then, the one we're talking about that lived on the Ennis place,
My mother,
or your mother?
Yeah.
That's
Mhm.
right,
Yeah.
okay. When did she pass away, maybe?
1961.
1961, okay, okay. Let's see, what was I? So she would have been living then with the old Sam Ennis and his wife?
Yes, it was Sam
Okay.
Ennis. Mhm.
Did you ever see any photos of the old Ennis house or the site at all, or?
If I did, I don't know. And
Okay.
my dad might have taken pictures, and they may have ended up somewhere else.
Yeah, those things
Something
are
like
really hard to find these days,
Yeah.
pictures of the place.
But I remember her telling, I asked her if she'd ever seen John Muir, and she said yes when he came to visit. And I expected it had to be the 92 or 94, possibly the time when this David Muir store
Okay.
folded up or something,
mhm.
that he was back visiting in the area.
What did she say about her meeting John Muir?
I think they were quite impressed at that time because by that time he'd been in the news and national news quite a bit by that time. And maybe they had all forgiven him too.
Does she recall much about what he looked like at the time, or what he talked about, or how he behaved, that sort of, what his personality was like?
I don't think he had changed that much from when he had the same enthusiasm and the same, I think nothing had changed him.
Okay, okay. What else can you recall? I think when we were out looking at the Muir lilacs, you said something that was I thought very insightful. You said that, I'll let you tell it, about Muir's impressions of this new wilderness coming to America after seeing what took place on the land in Scotland.
I think that seeing the eroded hills of Scotland and the sheep-grazed hills without much vegetation anymore, at least trees,
Right.
that and he came to this part of the world and enjoyed the wilderness, and then seeing people coming in and cutting it down. And so that by the time he was grown up, and he'd apparently followed this Humboldt, was one of the people he admired. And but when he went to California, and I often wondered how he traveled. Did he go that way on foot? But I guess he went from New York through, it was Panama Canal, wasn't there at that time?
Well,
Maybe they ferried across there somehow.
that or down around the Horn. 'Cause
Yeah.
The canal wasn't
Yeah.
open until 1913.
So,
Okay.
but there may have been a way to go from one ship to another.
Probably.
It almost sounded like that.
Okay.
And but anyhow, when he hit to California, he became he had the same zeal for nature as his father had for religion.
That's an interesting comment, too. How do you think his father, something about the background there, how do you think he shaped John Muir? How do you think he influenced him?
He had a lot of self-discipline, and I think he really got that from his dad.
Literally kind of thrashed into
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Okay. Can you have any other recollections, say, from your mother about the Ennis farm? Anything at all that you can think of, that her impressions of it, or what kind of man was Sam Ennis, for instance?
I think a fine man.
Mm-hmm.
I think they admired him. I think a lot of those men were forward-looking, and he was one of those.
And Mrs. Ennis, too, then?
I think so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. How long do you think she lived then with the Ennises?
2 or 3 years, possibly.
2 or 3 years?
Possibly not any more than that.
And I wonder, like they had these short terms and all, and I wonder if they went on because their wages were better to the next school, or what the reason would have been.
Very hard to tell.
Because they weren't that wage conscious, but
I think she probably went from here to Dartford, which was kind of a graded school.
Okay.
Which was no doubt better paid.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where, just across the road from the Baptist Assembly now, where the old school is.
Charlie mentioned earlier that he knows the site of the old Riverside or Ennis School, and we are talking, those two are the same school. I think it's the one right up here by the lake up. Yeah, okay. That school, as I mentioned to Charlie earlier, is now sitting over off of County O on a farm over there, and they use it as a storage shed. But do you remember much about the inside of the school, or what it looked like?
No, I remember her telling stories about how the girls' clothes were all hand-sewn, and when they were playing games and one ripped the skirt off the other girl, and they all crowded around her and found pins to pin it back up and things like that.
Charlie, do you remember much about what the building looked like?
No,
Not too much?
I never got over this part of
Okay.
until, practically in the 1940s.
Okay, yeah.
The person she talked the most about was Auntie Meg, and Auntie Meg had all these sayings, adages, and so on, and they lived by them. And
Now, Andy Meg, I haven't heard that name yet. Who was that?
John Cairns' sister. Was she older than he was?
She would be sister.
Just they were close in age.
The lady that married David Muir.
Okay.
She never married.
Okay.
And she helped raise them.
When my grandmother died in 1889, well then this Auntie Mag or Margaret raised all of them. Some of them were ready to leave home, but she was a mother to my father and her mother, and
But she came over here to visit Sarah Galloway.
Yeah.
She and this Aunt Mary
probably,
used
yeah.
to come over here.
I see,
Yeah.
okay. Maybe I'd also like you to talk a little bit about your father, George Tillema. And you mentioned before we had the tape on that he was a farmer, but maybe not such a good one. He had more of an interest in scholarly things and history.
Yeah.
He was a good farmer?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll take your word for that, Charlie.
He was.
He had a little bad luck.
Yeah, I'll bet.
No.
Most farmers do, I guess, too, these days. So,
But he
tell me what kind of a
he
man
was
your
born
father
in
was.
Friesland, and is youngest in the family, and the family retired to Milwaukee for the father and mother. But I think when he was about 12 or 13, he went back to Friesland, where his brothers lived, and worked on farms around there. And my mother was teaching at Friesland at the time. They called it Randolph Center, and staying with Dow Tillema, and that was my dad's brother. And that's how she met him. Although Aunt Catherine Cairns, the second Catherine Cairns, also taught in Friesland just before that. And she had known my dad. I don't know quite what the whole story was there.
Okay.
And but his father had come from Holland, from Friesland, Holland. But I think he had a pretty good education in Milwaukee, and I think right in there, Muir was in the news a lot. And he came out there knowing quite a bit about Muir, which probably wasn't true of the Friesland area.
Okay.
And so when he met my mother and found out that she came from Muir country up here, I think that was probably one of the things that got them together.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So, you know, I've come across something at the State Historical Society in Madison that mentions your father, and evidently he heard a lecture that was given by S. Hall Young, an Alaskan traveling companion of John Muir's. There's a note there to that effect in your father's handwriting. Do you remember anything about that, or what he told you about it?
Well, I talked to my sister on Sunday, and she said she remembered when he went to that lecture that this young gave, and how he always started out these lectures by saying, with a picture of John Muir, and the dog talking and saying, if it weren't for this man, I wouldn't be here today, something to that effect.
Okay. I think also in that same note in the State Historical Society, it seems to me that he was accompanied by a woman, a Cairns woman. Who would that have been?
Well, my mother.
Would that have been Lucy?
Lucy,
Cairns, his
I
wife?
expect so.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Because they did mention something in there about the original house burning down and then Ennis erecting another house and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, do you remember them telling you what year it would have been when the original Muir frame house burned? Any stories about that?
No, I don't. I think what I know I read in the Marsh.
Lenny Marsh
Wolf book, yeah.
Okay. What about you, Charlie? Do you remember anything like that?
Not, no,
Okay.
not really.
All right.
How many miles would there be between here and the Cairns, this farm, do you suppose?
I mean, as the crow flies.
Yeah, maybe they traveled as the crow flies, did they?
It's 6 miles.
So it would have been walking distance, the way they did a lot of walking.
I think they all gathered at the church here. The UP church was kind of the. But yeah, when they were over here, they weren't here just too many years on Fountain Lake Farm, and then they moved up here on the Hickory Hill farm. Yeah, then they were.
Then they were back to back, were they?
No, here was. But they were close by. And here was where the school was. It was either here or here.
Maybe we should have you mark that, Charlie, for that. Now was that an old log school?
Yeah.
I've always been looking for that. Is there any trace of that left?
I doubt it. Harry Cairns told Millie Stanley that there was where the school was, and my Uncle Chan always said in Emmett Mulhern's potato patch, which was here, right by the creek. Here was the creek, because a neighbor boy drowned there, a Maynard boy, in the creek. But whether it was here or here, that I don't know. Harry should know because he's been around
a century now. Yeah.
30 years longer than I have. And,
Okay.
But whichever, it was in the. And then that was the log school, and then they moved the school up to here, and this was a log school,
And
where
that's-
the brick school is now.
And that would be now isn't that a church?
Yeah, the church school has it now. The St. Andrew's Church
Okay.
has it for a hall.
And that's right off of CM at the intersection of
Right at
CM
the
and
intersection,
22
yeah.
there, huh? Okay. On the
And
west side.
It was donated by the Browns.
Uh-huh.
It was, I was reading in here about the Grays. So it was donated, the land was donated to them, and when they went to sell the church, they sold hers. When the school district went to sell the school, they sold it to Bill Brown for $1, and he turned it over to the Catholic Church because it was a brick building and couldn't be moved. And that where it stands. But anyway, they had a log school there at first before they built the frame one, because there were still stones of it when I went to school. It started in 24,
Okay.
but it's, I don't know, smoothed off by now. But
So this log school, though, the one nearest Hickory Hill, that there's some confusion as to where that was.
it was either here or here.
Or there, but that's been gone ever since you...
Long, way
Yeah.
long.
Okay.
Did you ever hear a story about one of the aunts that had a pet pig that followed her to that UP church?
That I
And
never,
would wait outside for her till church?
that I never heard, no. Possible.
Interesting story.
And about churches, according to this book, this old Daniel Muir was a member of the Disciple Church. I had always thought they were Presbyterians. But, I don't know if there's any connection, but they were more fundamentalists, apparently.
That's interesting, Mamie. One other person I want to know if you've either one of you know anything about is Byron Cadigan. I know he passed away a few years ago, and I've heard a rumor locally that the old house that's now been destroyed over at the Cadigan place was possibly built by Daniel Muir in the hopes that one of his sons would stay in the area. Have you ever heard that story?
No, never heard that at all.
Okay. Charlie, did you know Byron Canada?
Yes.
You knew him?
Yeah.
You never heard him relay that story?
No, I never visited that much with him.
Okay.
Just mostly on town affairs. We would see each other at election and town meetings, and that was about the extent of it.
Okay.
I have some, now that I find out where they're connected,
Mm-hmm.
I can give you the name of probably some relatives. I got a phone book out in the car here.
Okay.
I'll go get it. And,
Great. I'll shut the tape off then, Charlie.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
The farming today and the use of pesticides, and I'm mixed on that. It's if we didn't have anything to control the pests and the weeds, it would be, I don't know what would happen, because when I farmed, and it was pretty much subsistence farming, we couldn't afford that stuff, and the corn was a good yield was maybe 50 bushel the acre, and now it's 150. But food would be mighty high priced if we didn't have that stuff. And I work in the summertime for Del Monte, and they can green beans, grow them up in the irrigated country. And the profit on those things are so close, and they got to do it in such a big volume that stuff would be $2 a can if they had to do it any other way, but it might come to that, and it definitely might. And potatoes are cheaper now than they've ever been in all my life. Everything is. So it's hard to tell.
Okay.
I'd like to see it kind of go back a little bit, but that's progress. And that's about all I can say.
Okay.